Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. It's news for the week of April 28th.
Excellent. So you're probably tired from this weekend, aren't you?
I'm extremely tired. We had a very busy weekend. We did Minibar, which is kind of the last big tech conference, one of the last big tech conferences in Minnesota. A lot of them kind of dried up after COVID.
Yeah.
So we were at Minibar, and I was running the indie arcade there for the Independent Games Developer Association, Twin Cities. Mouthful. And then I also did a lightning talk, which I heard I did well.
Yeah.
I was very caffeinated, so I don't remember much of it.
Yeah, I stopped by a few times, and we actually had someone come by and say they were a fan of the podcast, so that was cool.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to have fans talk to us. This week, I'm going to be hosting a new event at the IGDA. We're going to do Jam Night on Wednesday, which is going to be bring a project. Doesn't have to be programming. It can be art. It can be sound. Any kind of game dev project you want to work on. And we'll just co-work and riff.
Yeah, that's sweet. Is that in person? Where is that?
Yeah, it's going to be in person at Noble Robot on Hennepin. So that is kind of in northeast Minneapolis. And if you go check out the website, they'll have the exact address, igdatc.org.
Cool. And we'll put that into the show notes just in case there are people from the Twin Cities that are listening. I want to do that.
Yeah. I went on Sunday and picked up new patio furniture in a Home Depot rental van.
Nice.
Which drives like a boat. It's quite large, but I'm excited. We tossed our old patio furniture. It was time. It was quite sad and home to many spiders. So it's gone now. We're all very pleased about it. So we'll be building that new furniture this week, I predict.
Nice. Well, yeah, I mean, I was at Minibar as well. Like I said, I was in TED-D, so I went to mostly sessions, and there were some great sessions. The one that stood out to me quite a bit was one called Do LLMs Reason? And it was by someone who works at Thomson Reuters in their foundational research department. But they have been training custom LLMs and stuff like that for a long time. So he went into a lot of technical details for how the reasoning process works. And it finally made sense to me, because this whole time I've been like, well, but how do they actually reason? What is going on? Because it's not like we reason. So, but how do they do it? Well, turns out that it's still just training, but basically you train them on the steps to arrive at an answer. And so it's still it's reinforcement learning. And there were some approaches that they talked about, the way that DeepSeek R1 is being trained. But basically what it boils down to is that it's still next token prediction, except that it's including the steps it took to arrive at an answer. So one of the things that he showed was they did a study on predicting taxi routes in New York City on 15 million taxi routes was the training data. And when they actually modeled what the reasoning model thought about the world, what the routes were, you could see that it was all over the place. So it sort of had the rough grid of what the traffic grid, but then you could see it had shortcuts all over the place with a curve route. And so anytime you tried to throw it a curveball, this road is closed, now which route do you take? It just would throw up because it just doesn't know. It doesn't know how to actually think through and reason about that type of stuff. It's all still based on training.
I think in that example, I would use classical pathfinding AI.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that, I was, I beat Avowed, like I said, so I did finish that, and now I'm playing South of Midnight. And then otherwise, we planned a camping trip in June, so I think that'll be fun. My wife and kids want to do fishing, so they've got a fishing class, and so we're going to drive up to a big lake here in Minnesota, and we're going to camp at the state park, so I think that'll be fun.
That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Let's get into the news. So like we said, we've been listening to what is going on in the TypeScript Go repo. So there has been a couple new things. One small little addition is they added a -version flag to the CLI. So now you can check what version you're using if you're using TSGo. Second, they did follow up on that autocomplete PR. So as you know, in the last update we shared, if you're using TypeScript Go in Visual Studio Code or an editor, you can get autocomplete. And they ported more of the member completions and they added more tests around that. So it's more complete now. And then finally, they introduced the ability to build a TypeScript Go Visual Studio extension, and it can replace the built-in version in Visual Studio Code. So I think that would make it a little bit easier if you want to use TypeScript Go as a native editor extension in Visual Studio Code, so now you can do that.
Next up, we have a new version of Deno, new minor version of Deno, a Deno 2.3. A lot of improvements in here. We've talked about a few of them, and as always, you can run Deno upgrade to update super fast. And a couple new things here is we have some improved Deno compile. So if you haven't tried out Deno compile, this again is a way of creating a single binary and bundling all of your stuff together so that it's easily distributed. So super useful for like CLI tools. Maybe you want to just distribute an exe so that someone can just double click on something and run your thing and they don't have to know any programming. They can just run your tool. So in Deno 2.3, they added support for programs that use foreign function interface, so FFI, which is great. And they also added the support for Node native add-ons. So this is like if you have existing Node native code, you can go ahead and use this. So you can include those into your packages, which is pretty slick. Also, you can add local NPM packages. This was in a patch that we talked about, and what this does is it's like an NPM link, but in your deno.json, you can do patch, and then you can do a path to a local NPM module. In the past, you needed to reference something that's already in the NPM registry. You can't just make up a package. It has to already be a package. So that's one caveat. Another one is they've enhanced Deno format to format CSS, HTML, and SQL in tag template literals, which is a big thing for me because I wind up using that a lot. So like, if you're not familiar with tag template literals, this is a JavaScript feature that is super, super potent where you can say like HTML backtick, and then you have tooling treated as HTML inside of that backtick. Super nice for doing like any kind of shenanigans in TypeScript or JavaScript where you need to embed other source languages in your code. Next up, we have built-in OpenTelemetry support. This was kind of getting rolled in, but now we have OpenTelemetry support with basic event recording, span context propagators, and Node::HTTP auto instrumentation. So this is like if you're using the Node compatibility later, you'll get that. And V8 JS engine metrics. That's pretty cool. So you can see different things that are happening in your JavaScript inside of the JavaScript engine that might be important to you. So that's a really super slick thing. And it's a thing I probably will be looking at.
Yeah, a lot of sweet stuff in there. Cool. Some other project that just came out by our friends over at Void Zero. Eric, this is a TypeScript bundler that's powered by Rolldown, and it's called tsdown. And it's kind of a drop-in replacement for tsup, but tsdown is specific for building libraries with TypeScript. And I think this is really cool. So first, you may know that Rolldown is it's the successor to Rollup, right? Because it's written in Rust. So this is part of Void Zero's Rust-based JavaScript ecosystem. And the thing about Rolldown is that it's like Webpack, where it's very configurable, so you can customize it to whatever you need. And so what tsdown does is it's basically an opinionated version of a Rolldown configuration specific for TypeScript library authors. So rather than Rolldown being a general purpose tool, tsdown is a complete out-of-the-box solution for library authors. So one of the things that it does, for example, is it configures and can generate TypeScript declarations using awkc. It can also generate ESM, CommonJS, and IIFE, which is what does that stand for? It's the immediately invoked function expression, IFI, bundles to ensure compatibility across environments. IFI bundles are usually for the web, if you've seen that pattern before. So it supports those 3 output methods, which is pretty sweet. It's totally integrated with rolldown because it's built on top of it, which means that it's also going to evolve alongside it. And then another really notable feature, which is important for libraries like Excalibur, is that it supports non-JavaScript and TypeScript assets like CSS files or, ping files or things like that, which means that I think this could make a lot of sense for Excalibur because that's something that was preventing us from using like TSC by itself. You can't just use TypeScript Go by itself. You need like a bundler to handle those assets.
Yeah, this is super exciting because we sit and wait for a Webpack build for quite a long time. And I know we want to look at RSPack as like an option, but for some of the things in RSPack, it still has to thunk out to, existing plugins that we might be using, and those would still be in JavaScript. So depending on what we're doing, it might still be slow. We haven't explored RSPack yet, but that, I think this is in the realm of contenders for things that we might swap out for.
Yep. Yeah, so I would see RSPack as like it's a drop-in replacement for Webpack, whereas tsdown is supposed to be a drop-in replacement for tsup in sort of the roll-up ecosystem.
Very cool.
Yeah. Meta Framework Watch. We've got Astro 5.7. Now, this actually came out April 18th, so we're a couple weeks late here. But we only covered 5.4 back in February, and so there's been a few minor versions. So I thought we should probably mention that with Astro 5.7, you get some cool stuff. One, you got the new experimental fonts API. So this will simplify custom font usage with support for Google, Font Source, Bunny, and local fonts. Plus, it has like automatic fallback font generation. And then the other thing that I thought was pretty cool is that they brought the Sessions API to stable, so it used to be experimental. This enables you to have server-side session management for like storing user data, shopping carts, form states, without any client-side JavaScript. So that's pretty sweet. And then I know you got excited about SVG components. So these allow you to directly use local SVG files as components, making them easier to integrate scalable vector graphics.
Yeah, this is a thing that we do all the time at work where we have like a cool chart or we have a cool like thingamabob that users might interact with, and SVGs are kind of like the way to do it. If we're going to have like a cool graphic that needs to be interactable that doesn't kind of fit into the normal modus of like web UI. And this really makes it easy to mess with SVGs.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. TypeScript FM is sponsored by Excalibur.js, the friendly TypeScript game engine for the web. Like many of you, I got into computers because I loved video games and dreamed of making one, but game development always felt a bit intimidating. Instead, I built a career in web development, though that dream of making games never really went away. Then I met Eric, who showed me I could use my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to create games with just a bit of game design knowledge and the right engine. Excalibur.js makes game development approachable, offering everything you need to build 2D web games. Arcade physics, sprites, animations, input support, and integrations with tools like Tiled and Asprite. It's beginner-friendly, yet flexible enough to grow with you. Our team has published 10 games using Excalibur, all written in TypeScript. If you're a web developer looking to dip your toes into game dev or sharpen your TypeScript skills, give Excalibur.js a try at excalibur.js.com. Click the big tutorial button to start building your first game, Excalibur, a Flappy Bird clone. After that, join our friendly Discord community of web developers who love to help each other and share game dev tips. We got some neat community highlights. You want to start us off with what's going on in the community?
Yeah, first up, I have a great post by BlueSky user cinny.bun.how, which talks about how TypeScript gives you free macros. And it's kind of a neat little thing where you can make, and if you think about it, it's kind of like a C macro, right? Where you're just doing like text replacement. But they kind of like hit on a thing that I didn't think about before, where you could just say, oh, I want a type that does some string replacement in this, particular literal. And you could just have like a complex object shape. And you could say, hey, type animal sound S extend string, and then somewhere in this deeply nested object, I want to like interpolate that S, that type parameter, and then you have a macro. So, and you could do that. You could do that with lots of stuff, and we'll have a link to that in the post if that's not immediately clear. But in C, like you do that type of thing a lot, where you give it like it's a function, but it outputs code. In this case, it's like a function, type function that outputs the shape of a type, which is kind of neat.
Okay.
And I hadn't even considered using it like this before. I mean, it's totally a thing you could have done. And it just kind of unlocked maybe some, fossilized part of my brain. And I thought it was cool.
Nice.
Next up, we have Dan Abramov doing a BlueSky Ask Me Anything. And this was posted 2 days ago. You can ask him about React, at Proto, or whatever else. And it's a really active thread of people just asking Dan cool stuff. And I do recommend taking a look at it. There's a lot of really interesting posts in there. A lot of good nuggets. Next up, friend of the show, Josh Goldberg, wrote a really cool blog post, which is going to be part of a series of, building a linter. And this first one is If I Wrote a Linter, Part 1, the architecture. And I think this is really interesting, kind of a new take based on like TSGo and kind of the future of linters. And I think it's a great read. Some of the kind of the notable highlights is, this idea of a hybrid model where we want to take advantage of native speeds, but we also like the ergonomics of TypeScript. So we would like to write our code, our userland code in TypeScript, but we would like to delegate things to native code to run really fast. And also that we want to take advantage of TypeScript's type awareness in our linting. So it's a really good post. I definitely would take a look at it. Definitely reach out to him on BlueSky. We'll include a link to the BlueSky post with any feedback you have. He's kind of building in public here. So I think if you have any cool ideas or anything that you want to throw his way, I think he would be more than willing to hear that out.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And knowing Josh and sort of what he talked about on that episode, and you should go back and listen to it, I think ergonomics and developer experience are super important to him. And so I'm excited because if he has the opportunity to design a brand new type-aware linter, I bet that it's going to also be a lot easier to write custom linters for our projects. And that was always the biggest barrier for me because it felt like, you have to know AST, abstract syntax tree, and some all those nuances. Like, here's how you traverse nodes, or like, here's how you, get to this piece of like little code. I want to get the variable declaration. You have to like know all the jargon and stuff. And so I think if we could see a more ergonomic and accessible DX for building custom linters, that would be pretty sweet.
Be very cool. And next up, there's a really interesting user case study on the Deno blog about how Plaid migrated their 100 services to a new database platform with Deno Deploy, using Deno's serverless powered platform. So some key highlights that they raised in the article was execution speed improved 5x. That's absolutely wild. Their downtime was reduced from 5 minutes to 60 seconds. And I assume that's on deployment. And then migration cutover time dropped from weeks to days, which I think that's pretty cool. Means you can move quickly. They really highlighted the built-in TypeScript support. The zero config for dependency management was a huge one. The strict security model, which is important to them as like a SaaS platform, and robust shell execution, and the ability to run Jupyter notebooks with TypeScript.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And if you're not familiar with Plaid, they are like, if you imagine a SaaS that can connect to bank accounts, that's what it does. And so like a lot of financial tools use Plaid to connect to your bank account. So like, for example, I use USAA and they actually have an OAuth connection. Like I can have a read-only connection to my transactions and my account balance and stuff like that. And Plaid just does that for thousands of banks. And it's a pretty cool service too. So if you wanted to build a financial app and you don't want to have to deal with connecting to people's banks, you just use Plaid and you just deal with Plaid's abstraction over all of that. So it's super cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
I've got some ideas now for like budget app.
Yeah. and related to talking about case studies and TypeScript, Pinterest and their engineering blog highlighted how they migrated over 3.7 million lines of Flow code to TypeScript. One thing that they did, which is pretty cool, is they did it all in one go because they could use a code mod that transpiled Flow code to TypeScript. And one of the things that they talked about is because it was such a huge lift and a huge change, they needed to be like 100% sure that they were going to get the same exact functionality. And so that they detail some of the stuff they did to do a byte for byte analysis. So they basically could compare the transpiled code from Flow to the transpiled code from TypeScript, and they made sure that it matched byte for byte. So they could be 100% confident that their migration wasn't going to break something. So I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of like lessons to learn, not necessarily about migrating TypeScript, but migrating systems in general.
Yes.
Like doing a byte for byte, a bug for bug port is kind of your safest option. You need to resist the urge to fix bugs while you're doing like a big port. Mm-hmm. Like you can write them down and like keep track of them, certainly, when you come across them, because when you're porting something, you'll probably be like, oh, I think that's a bug. You'll definitely come across stuff like that, but it's really important. And this is kind of highlighting like using tools to do that. And we did this at Renaissance when we were porting a massive publishing system for processing content, and it was paramount that it was bug for bug, identical results.
Yep. And the other thing that they did that was cool in the articles, they actually shared their internal survey results for developer experience. So they actually surveyed their developers who are their customers, like how did the migration go? And it was something like 90% were like super happy with the migration.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Next up, we have Dr. Axel's Corner. He was on a little bit of a hiatus for the month of April, but he did get some in there at the very end. He's got an article on converting values to strings in JavaScript. So not necessarily TypeScript related, although it is pretty interesting if you look at this list that he has of ways to convert values to strings. Eric, you're looking at this list too, I bet. Is there one of these that like you had not thought about before? Because I'm thinking of one.
Yeah, if I'm reading your mind, the last one, the object literal toString.call, which seems to be in the conclusion of the article the most reliable way, is also the most heinous looking. Yeah,
that one's pretty wild. Among the 5 approaches that he lists, the object literal.toString.call works for all these tricky values. So it can convert undefined, null, symbol, and dunder proto null, which I would not have thought of to test even. So anyway, you should definitely go take a look at his deep dive. Next up, if you want to build your own Vite or build your own dev tool, build your own dev server, there is a TypeScript library that was just announced called Immaculata, I want to say.
Seems right.
Yeah, and it provides what they say developer experience primitives for building your own build tool, and that includes like HMR support in Node.js. You can implement in 5 lines of code, or if you want to implement JSX support, there are primitives for that. And so this is kind of interesting because we've talked about previously, like in the Excalibur episode, Excalibur technically supports HMR, but not really, because it just restarts the page. And so you lose the game state that you're in. And so this might be a way to, if we wanted to build our own Excalibur dev server and implement it ourselves, we could customize the way HMR works, which could be, custom to the Excalibur engine. But anyway, if you've ever been in a situation where you're finding a framework to be too opinionated and you just want to build it yourself, this might be a cool foundation to build off of. There's a funny quote in the documentation that says, every sufficiently complex program creates code generation, and they attribute it to Sun Tzu. Well, of course, Sun Tzu never said that, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I feel like that's a corollary of Atwood's law, which is every sufficiently complex, or what is, no, it's any program capable of being written in Excel will be.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Finally, in the Vue community, there's something to get excited about. Apparently, there has not been a way to do type-safe Vue route management, and now there is. So I saw this one on Reddit, but I'll just quote from the original poster who said, URL state management is something I needed in almost every Vue project. Filters, sorting, pagination, user preferences. I wanted a solution that was truly type-safe, worked out of the box, handled all the edge cases automatically, and provided an excellent developer experience without sacrificing performance. So written in TypeScript, you get type-safe Vue route management. So that plugin is called Vue Route Query, and I'll obviously link to that in the show notes. But maybe that might make you jump for joy if you're in the Vue community.
Yeah, that looks really cool. I think there's been a lot of really cool, like using template literals, doing like type safe routing, and you can get really wild with it in TypeScript. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Speaking of cool, we've got some cool stuff. I came across two things. First thing, are you a fan of Git, Eric?
Well, I kind of am, but some people aren't.
Some people aren't. And I live with it. You know what I mean? Like, we have to sort of be fine with it because it's what everything uses. And coming from like Team Foundation, it is like way better. But that's not to say that it's super easy to get started with. And there are definitely things in Git that are just weird. And there is a reason why there's a website called Oh Darn Git, because you can get stuck with stuff and then you have to like get out of it. And so anyway, before using Git, I'd played with Mercurial, and I thought that was a pretty nice developer experience. But obviously Git won. But I just saw on BlueSky someone talking about Sapling. So Sapling is by Meta, and it was introduced by them specifically to work on their monorepo, because monorepos in Git can be pretty unwieldy, especially if they're really, really big. And I know that there's like Git LFS, like large file storage. And then Microsoft came out with something, I forget what it was called, but it basically virtualized your file system so that it only pulled stuff that you were working on, and that's how they got around it. But apparently Sapling was developed by Meta, and it is a replacement for Git, which means that it's compatible but has a better DX like that, so that it works better with like monorepos and large repositories. So anyway, I think that could be cool if you're kind of interested in that, where like you don't want to give up on all your tools that use Git, but you also just don't want to work with Git on the daily in your terminal. So like you could use Sapling. So the other thing, if you are an HVAC nerd, I guess I'm not really an HVAC nerd, except that I did do a lot of research when I was replacing my HVAC system here in my home. But I am building an office in my backyard, and it's pretty small. It's only going to be like 170 square feet. And so one of the questions on my mind was, how do I heat it? How do I cool it? And obviously, if you've seen wall-mounted units, those are called ductless HVAC. And so obviously they don't use any ducts. So you don't have to put any ducts in the ceiling, except that the thing is that they can just kind of be an eyesore, right? And if I want to build an office, I either do not want it in my camera shot, like behind me when I'm like recording, but I also don't want it up in front of me, because if it's going to be wall mounted, it's going to just be blowing air in my face, right? So there are a couple design considerations that I'm trying to work through myself. But I was reading the latest issue of Fine Home Building, and I learned that there is something called a ceiling cassette. And what these are, they basically just move the vent and the air handler into the ceiling. And so if you imagine just like it goes in between the rafters in your ceiling, and that's where the vent is, but there's no ducts. It's like all just a self-contained unit. So I guess that's called a ceiling cassette. I mean, they are a little bit more expensive, and there's not as many options for them, but they can fit between like 24-inch on center or even 16-inch on center joists up there, or rafters, I guess they're called in the ceiling. But anyway, that could be a way to hide your HVAC, but still get the benefit of like a ductless system. So I was going to look into that.
Sweet. I've been kicking around building an office in my backyard if we have another kiddo, because I will have to give up my current office for another kid room. So that might be a thing I look at in the future.
Yeah, well, I will have plans and material lists and everything that I could turn around and make into an ebook or even just help people design their own offices.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that might be a thing. I've got some cool stuff. One nugget that came out of the lightning talks at Minibar was an open source tool called FontForge at fontforge.org, where you can just make and modify fonts. It's super slick. Just check it out. Like if you need to make some custom glyphs, you can go at it. And in the context of the talk, they were making custom chess glyphs and making new chess pieces. So, that's kind of cool. Next up that I have is a video by 3 Blue 1 Brown about quantum computing. And this video was great because I didn't really understand quantum computing until this video. It kind of clicked after this video. So definitely take a look at it if you're like, oh, maybe I should know about quantum computing and what it can do and the areas where it's useful and maybe the areas where it isn't. Because it's not like let's sprinkle some quantum on this and make it better. It's kind of like specific problems this can help with, kind of like LLMs, specific problems it can help with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe don't sprinkle it on everything. There's also another video by Kay Locke about Ed, which is one of the earliest text editors, and it's famously user hostile. And it's a history piece, and it's super interesting to watch. I'm a NeoVim nerd, so I like watching videos about text editors. That's my jam. It might not be yours. And the last thing I have is gameicons.net. It's game-icons.net. And if you're making a game or if you're making an app, you don't have to be making a game, but there's a whole bunch of free icons that you can use in your projects.
Nice.
That's what I got.
I'm building that bowling calculator app. I wonder if they have some bowling icons I could use.
I'm sure they do. They have over 4,000 icons that you can use.
Ooh, that's sweet.
Awesome. I think that's the news. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to typescript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on BlueSky. I'm at kamronigus.com, and Eric is at ericonerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.